evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Wilkinson. I'm the managing partner here at Global Migrate South Africa. Today is the 15th of November 2023, and we'd like to thank you for attending our free November webinar. Today we're going to be having a little discussion with regards to Australian migration. Everybody attending today has had an interaction with one of our consultants, and we've come to the conclusion that you're a suitable applicant to relocate to Australia. So today we wanted to ideally show you some of the benefits, what we bring to the table, create a little bit of urgency in the fact that these are not open-ended opportunities, and hopefully give you guys enough confidence to do the hardest part of the process, which is physically getting started. Okay, so the first thing that I actually wanted to do is there's a couple of ways that most South Africans tend to enter into Australia. One of the most attractive options is to enter through the Australian Skilled Migration Program. Now, Australia is one of only 2 countries on the planet where if a member of the household can evidence to the Australian government, of course with our assistance, that they score enough points in one of Australia's critical skill occupations based on their age, their qualifications, their years of work experience post-qualification, and their general English ability, then that particular applicant, their partner, and any dependent children have the opportunity to apply for straight residency in the country without the need to secure an employment offer first. Now, of course, having residency in the country is great because it immediately comes attached with all the bells and whistles, all the perks like healthcare, education, and social security as well. Now, when we look at the Australian Skilled Migration Program, Australia has 3 different skilled visas. Of course, as you can see on the screen, you get something called the 189, the 190, and the 491. Now, the 189 is what we consider the golden ticket. It is straight permanent residency for the household, and you have absolutely no restrictions on where you reside in Australia. So Australia is literally your oyster with the 189, go where you please. Now, the 190 and the 491 are still residency type statuses. The 190 is straight permanent residency, whilst the 491 is a temporary residency status. These are still incredible options, and to be honest, guys, the 190 and the 491 are generally the most likely visas that are going to materialize. And the reason for that is, although the government gives you straight residency on both the 190 and the 491 visas, there is one condition, and that condition is simply for the first 2 to 3 years that you and your family live and work in Australia, you will have to go live and work in a state or a province in Australia where the main applicant's occupation is listed as a local domestic critical skill shortage. Now, I don't want you guys to think that you're under house arrest or anything like that. Remember, you are still a resident on both visas, so you can come and go into Australia as many times as you like. You can come back to SA or whichever your home country is for the festive period, go across to Thailand for a week if you choose to do so. They simply want to see that the main applicant, the skill set that gained the family or the household access into Australia, that particular applicant is working and residing in an area of high demand. Okay, so all of the skilled visas do come attached with all the perks. Healthcare is provided by Medicare, the state-funded healthcare system in Australia, and of course, dependent children are able to attend any government educational institution or school, state subsidized as well. Okay, now generally if an applicant has an occupation on the medium to long-term critical skills list and they have enough points, we tend to apply for the 189, the 190, and the 491, and we sit back and we see which option materializes first. Okay, now when we look at the difference between skilled visas and of course employer-sponsored visas, the difference is that for anything like the 482, and I'm going to throw a lot of jargon at you guys, don't worry, we're here to help. You're more than welcome to interact with your consultant as well if any of this doesn't make sense. But the difference between a skilled migration visa or a skilled visa is that you do not need a job offer, you do not need a sponsor, you can apply for straight residency simply based on your skill set. Now, the difference between, of course, an employer-sponsored, as you can see on the screen, is that you would actually need to secure a job offer, and that employer in Australia would need to physically nominate you to the Australian government to get permission to bring in a foreigner to fill the vacancy. Now, there's 3 different types of employer-sponsored visas, but the most common visa that we tend to project manage, or that we get offers to manage is the 482. Now, the 482 is an employer-sponsored skilled visa. It allows the applicant and their partner and their children to enter Australia based on the fact that an employer has provided a sponsorship for them. Now, on the 482 visa, although you have full working rights, your partner will obtain an open work permit or the same working rights, your kids can go to school, etc. The only thing with the 482 is that you don't have access to any of the benefits in Australia. So you would generally be forking out for healthcare and education at least up until the time you move on to residency. Now, what we generally do is for most applicants that secure a job offer before they get residency and go over on a 482, if it is an option, we actually encourage them to run their skilled visas in the background, applying for residency passively in the background, because what that does is massively limit the amount of time that the applicant and their family spends onshore on a work permit bound to one employer without access to any of the benefits. Okay, now the 494 is very similar to the 482, except that this is when an employer is based in what's considered by the Australian government a regional area, so generally outside of the main CBDs in Australia. Now, the 494 is actually an incredible visa, and the government is trying to incentivize applicants to stay out of your more saturated CBDs and go into these more regional areas. So the 494, although it's an employer-sponsored visa, it comes attached with Medicare. So although it's on a work permit, the applicant, together with their partner and children, would still have access to the state-funded healthcare system as well. Okay. Now, on the 494, it is a direct pathway to permanent residency. Once the applicant has been on a 494 in a regional area for 3 years, they can then apply for a bridging visa and migrate their family over to permanent residency. Okay. Now, the 186 is, of course, like the 189, it's the golden ticket. We don't see a lot of them. What this is if an applicant has an occupation on the medium to long-term critical skills list, they receive a job offer in Australia, and that particular employer is willing to immediately nominate the applicant and their family for straight permanent residency. Now, to set realistic expectations, guys, the reason that we don't see a lot of 186s is because the moment the applicant has permanent residency, legally they are no longer bound to that employer. So it costs a lot of capital to sponsor a foreign applicant into Australia. So it's quite risky for an employer to sponsor an applicant in their household for permanent residency, knowing that when that applicant arrives, they can immediately move on to potentially greener pastures or another employer. So the vast majority of the time, applicants are being sponsored for visas like the 482 and the 494, because these visa types or employer-sponsored visas will bind you to that particular employer for at least 3 to 4 years, or sometimes 2 years, depending on which list the occupation is found on. Okay. Now, things you need to know when it comes to skilled migration. Skilled migration is not a fly-by-night program. You know, we always say to applicants, you know, if you meet the requirements for skilled migration, it is an opportunity you're going to make use of. You don't have to start saying goodbye to family. You never resign from your job. You don't need to start selling your property. We generally only encourage applicants to start making major alterations in their life, like resigning from their current employer or selling any properties, for example, once their visas are approved. Okay, but when we look at skilled migration, it's generally a 2 to 3 stage process, and we take this stage by stage. So there's a lot of immigration companies out there that will only commence work on stage 1 of your skilled migration program once you've actually paid them in full for all 3 stages. We prefer to take a low-risk approach for the applicant or yourselves, as well as us as the representation. So regardless of how much capital or liquidity our clients have, the strength of their application, or the demand for the occupation, we don't allow any of our applicants to pay our fees for all 3 stages up front. So with Global Migrate South Africa, Skilled Migration Australia is always a stage-by-stage process, and that is both psychologically and financially. Okay, so I'm going to go through the stages involved in the Australian Skilled Migration Program. Okay, now generally in stage 1, there's 2 primary components that have to take place before you can proceed to the subsidiary stages. And these 2 components is, of course, an English exam and a skills assessment. Now, the English exam, generally there are 2 options that an applicant and their partner can proceed with. We usually recommend you either go for the IELTS general, depending on the occupation. Certain occupations, unfortunately, aren't able to have or facilitate the general version of the English exam, and it's mandatory as part of their skills assessment. They have to do an academic version, for example, teachers. I mean, it only makes sense. You're going into an English-speaking country as an educator that you are expected to educate their youth. They expect all foreign teachers coming into the country through this program to have a superior threshold in English, but the vast majority of occupations are only expected to prove a moderate or proficient threshold in English. Now, with Global Migrate, generally when it comes to the English exam, the subsidiary option that you can go for, vast majority of the time, is something called the Pearson's or the PTE exam. If possible, we would usually recommend the applicant and their partner rather go for the Pearson's exam for a couple of reasons. It's a little bit cheaper. There's less waiting times to get a booking because it's the lesser known of the 2 exams. So there's less competition to secure a booking. And we've been collecting stats for years and years and years, and we've come to the conclusion that on average, applicants tend to score slightly better on the PTE or the Pearson's exam as opposed to the IELTS exam as well. Now, Global Migrate, as part of our stage 1 service fees, is we generally guide applicants if need be on the booking and the payment of the English exam, and we provide you an almost 20-page itinerary or guide and study material. We provide you with some practice material, tips and techniques on the reading, writing, listening, and speaking aspects, as well as a few mock exams. We also have a registered tutor on our books. Very few applicants tend to utilize it, but we have that sort of luxury if an applicant feels they need additional coaching as well. Okay, so that's one component of stage 1 is the English exam. The primary component of stage 1 is something called the Australian Skills Assessment. And this is actually the reason that stage 1 generally takes at least around 6 to 8 months to complete, is because the Australian Skills Assessment is where the applicant, with our assistant, proves to the Australian government or the relevant assessing body in Australia that not only do their qualifications, but also the work experience they've obtained post-qualification, both of these fall in line with the standards expected for the occupation in Australia. Now, unfortunately, this particular process is a 100% mandatory requirement of applying for skilled migration into Australia. There's no way to bypass it, unfortunately, folks. Okay, now Global Migrate as an institution, our service fees for stage 1 actually cover us project managing the entire skills assessment for you. Not only do we build the application for you, we deal with the assessing body on your behalf. We also submit the application through our own company portals. We simply spoon feed the applicants a bucket list of the documents required. And every time you upload a bit of documentation to us, we will also be vetting those documents to ensure they meet legislative requirements or the assessing body's requirements. So our applicants might upload a bit of documentation to us, and we say, oh, Michael, careful, They don't like it when it's in this format. That will lead to a rejection, or you don't need to include this on your reference letters, for example. We've been working with these assessing bodies for years and years and years. We know what they're looking for, and we guide you accordingly. Okay, now the moment that your skills assessment is completed successfully, and both applicants within the household, if it is a couple, have completed their English exams, this is when we move on to something called an EOI, which is an expression of interest. Now, an expression of interest, the clue is very much in the title. This is where we either approach the Australian federal government directly or certain states or territories in Australia that have the main applicant's occupation listed as a local domestic shortage, and we submit a basic profile for the household, and this is called an expression of interest. So this is basically Global Migrate on the family's behalf approaching, saying that our applicants have interest in residing in your particular state or territory, or have interest in obtaining a 189. Now, the EOI, or expression of interest, is actually covered as part of our Stage 1 service fees. Most immigration companies will ask you to pay for the expression of interest as part of their Stage 2 service fees. We feel far more comfortable doing the EOI, or expression of interest, pro bono, and once the applicant receives an invite from one of these states or territories, it's only at that point we ask our applicants to pay for Stage 2 as well. So again, a much lower risk approach for not only us, but you as the applicants as well. Okay, now when we get to Stage 2, as you guys can see at the state or the regional nomination, this would be where, you know, the EOI has been picked up by one of the states or territories. Now, a lot of applicants are under the impression that we choose the state or the territory where they are going to be based in initially. Completely fictionalized, guys. When we get to Stage 2 or to the EOI, your caseworker will then present which states or territories are open for your occupation. Something along the lines of, great, Michael, for your particular occupation, these are the 4, 5, or even sometimes 6 states that are desperately looking for your occupation. We then present a lot of the pros and cons of each particular state or territory, and it is you as the applicant that makes the final call on where we apply to. Okay, now what's great is that as soon as this particular state or territory approves and endorses your application for either a 190 or a 491 visa, they will provide a certificate of endorsement, but they will then go approach the Australian federal government on your behalf, and they will request your invitations to apply for residency. Okay, so as you can see here, it's a little bit chopped up, but we get to visa application at that point. So the moment that you receive your invites, these are known as ITAs, or invitations to apply for residency. And this is actually an extremely time-sensitive part of the program, because these invitations for residency only come attached with a 60-day validity date on them. So it's not just a matter of going, great, we've got 60 days to accept the invite. It's 60 days to accept it. We need to build the entire visa application. We need police clearances and medicals facilitated. And of course, what we always do is before we submit your final visa application, which is the most critical component of the application, we always run one final full comprehensive audit on the application, just to ensure without a shadow of a doubt that the entire application and all the components from Stage 1 and 2 as well meet the Australian federal government's legislative requirements. Okay, so generally when we knock on your door, we say, congratulations, Michael, you received an invitation last night. We've now got 60 days to submit. It's crunch time, and we really need to move forward quite quickly as well. But what we generally do to eradicate or to alleviate the stress of the lack of time that we have is we generally collect the vast majority of the documents for the visas during the course of Stage 1 and 2 already, so that by the time our clients are selected, we don't have to panic and run around like headless chickens before we proceed to the submission. Okay, wonderful. Now, of course, guys, please remember that once your visa, the audit has, we received the green light on the audit, and we click that final submit button on the visas. It's generally on average. We always work with averages because we don't set the time frames for this program. We work with third-party assessors or with the government. So we just base our time frames on averages. It's usually around 4 to 6 months later you get your visa grants. Congratulations. Okay. Now, the moment that you receive your visas, a skilled visa, whether it's a 189, 190, or a 491, you don't necessarily have to immigrate to Australia immediately, but you have to make a trip over to Australia, usually within the first 6 to 12 months, even if it's just for a visit. And the sole purpose of this initial visit is the government gives you the visa, but it's not activated yet. And the only way you can activate Australian permanent residency is to actually enter their borders and activate it onshore. Now, the moment that you've entered Australia and you've made that initial activation trip, you then have the luxury of either option A, staying in Australia when you go over to activate and continuing your life there onshore as a resident, no obligation to return, or a small percentage of our clients will utilize plan B, where they go over on a holiday, activate the visa, they're still not quite ready to relocate. They can then return to their home country, generally South Africa, and they've bought themselves up to 24 months to wrap up loose ends, secure their jobs and relocation services, and then only do they relocate. Now, of course, guys, as you can imagine, the vast majority of our clients, the moment their visas are approved, they're immediately securing their jobs, and when they activate, they are relocating permanently. It's generally a very smaller percentage of our applicants that are actually going over on a holiday, coming back and relocating at a later stage. Okay. Now, what I wanted to actually go through as well is, why it's a good idea to get your foot in the door as soon as possible. Now, a lot of people think that we say this to everybody. When you've been in the industry as long as I have, I've interacted with thousands and thousands of applicants over the last 8 years, and I've had it many, many, many times where I quoted a great applicant, they qualified for residency, they didn't make use of the opportunity for whatever reason, I completely respect it. There might have been something in the household, it might have been fear, it might have been capital, for example. They might have secured a job offer, a really good job in their home country. But when they contact us a couple of years later to say, Mark, I don't know if you remember us, my name's Michael, we finally made up the decision, we've got the capital, we're ready to make the move, we run through another assessment for them, and it's often that unfortunately they no longer meet the requirements. There's a couple of reasons for this. Remember, guys, skilled migration is all supply and demand based. The government will say, great, we need X amount of secondary school teachers to come through this program, and once that demand is met, they close the occupation for this program. If you have not completed your program, or at least submitted your visas at that point, you're left at the station and the opportunity is gone. So another reason to meet those or to kind of get the ball rolling now is that the states and territories will publish their demand. Remember that the immigration year in Australia, it starts on the 1st of July and it ends on the 30th of June. So applicants that are pulling the trigger now, they have the opportunity now to complete their entire skills assessment, get their English exam, and submit their expression of interest during this immigration year before the states and territories close around June this year. So on the 1st of July 2024, the government will then run labour surveys. They will come to the conclusion, these are the occupations that are now in demand, and they will proceed for the next 12 months prioritizing those occupations as well. Okay, so we always say to applicants, if you are serious about relocating, skilled migration is never an open-ended ticket. It's all based on supply and demand. Get your foot in the door. Like I said, we take a cautious approach. We take this stage by stage, but we always say the hardest part of getting started with immigration is actually making that initial move and getting the ball rolling. Once you're on board with us, you know, you're in it to win it, and it kind of snowballs, and we take the reins, hold your hand through the rest of the journey as well. Okay. Now, of course, like I said, the more reasons that you have policy changes, occupations are often removed and added to the critical skills list. For this particular migration year, quite a few of the occupations that were on the medium to long-term critical skills list were downgraded to the short-term skills list. Now, what that means is that there's still demand for the occupation, but the government is just not as sure how long the demand will be around for. And of course, remember that the moment if your occupation is on the medium to long-term critical skills list, you can apply for any of the 3 skilled visas, 189, 190, and 491. The moment the occupation is downgraded to the short-term skills list, the 189, the golden ticket, then becomes null and void. You would then only have the luxury of the 190 and the 491 at your disposal. Okay. Now, of course, guys, like I said, the government in Australia, they've got a massive labor shortage in Australia. So with critical skill occupations, they are simply not qualifying these roles fast enough through their local domestic universities to deal with the growth in infrastructure and demand. And of course, another thing that is driving this massive migration move in Australia specifically is they also have an aging population. So there's a big percentage of the population that is going into retirement in the next 5 to 10 years. And the government is preempting that, bringing in these skilled workers into the country now to avoid them, for lack of a better term, being caught with their pants down later down the line. Now, of course, guys, we are a hybrid agency, so we do immigration and recruitment. Our objective is to not only obtain our clients a visa, but of course, we would love the opportunity to place our clients. Of course, when it comes to the recruitment front, we do, of course, want to set realistic expectations on the recruitment front. We never promise or guarantee that we'll find you a job before you find your own, but we don't charge for our recruitment services. We're actually massively financially incentivized to find you a job. We generate a lot of our revenue through placements, because if we secure our applicant a job before they find their own, we have the opportunity to send the employer in Australia an invoice for a placement fee. We don't charge the employee. Rule of thumb, guys, when it comes to international recruitment, anybody that wants to charge you up front to look for work for you, or anybody that wants to charge you up front to secure a job, that is a red flag. That is likely a scam. No legitimate recruitment company, especially international recruitment, will charge you to look for work for them, or will charge you to secure a job offer. Okay, wonderful. And of course, guys, well, another sort of value-added service that we bring to the table as well is that we have a relocations partner in Australia. Look, we know this is an extremely big and scary move. There's lots to think about. It's not just the visa. It's not just the job. How do I get to Australia? How do I set up a bank account? What about accommodation, etc.? So we've actually got an incredible relocations partner based in Australia. She's actually a South African lady. We helped go through this program a couple of years ago. She's in Australia now. She owns her own relocations firm that we partnered with. And she helps all our applicants, once they got their visas and jobs, with very important aspects like setting up a bank account, looking for accommodation, moving your possessions and belongings across, like forwarding and freighting, sourcing schools for kids, pet relocations, as well as providing guidance on how to convert your driver's license. So we're trying as much as possible here at Global Migrate South Africa to create a sort of 360-degree solution, you know, where it's a one-stop sort of shop for everything immigration related. There's visas involved, there's recruitment involved, as well as relocation services as well. And all our applicants have access to our affiliates and partners once they come on board. We also have another partner that owns her own travel company, and she helps all our clients with flights later down the line once they're ready to actually start booking and confirming their flight patterns as well. Okay, good. All right. Now, what we say is, like we reiterate again, secure your opportunity. Guys, I don't know if you have all the applicants out there. if you have seen it, Global Migrate, we are a service provider, but we are running an incredible incentive out there. Speak to your consultant out there. We are actually offering a lot of our applicants a reduced service fee if they're in a position where they can get started on or before the end of the month. If you think about it this way, we're competing against Black Fridays, Christmases, holidays as well. But what we're trying to show our potential applicants is the benefit of rather starting and investing into your future as opposed to buying a new TV. In 5 years' time, all of you out there are either going to be telling one of two stories. You're either going to be moaning about load shedding stage 25. You're going to be moaning about the current legislative issues of the ruling party, the current issues that you have, problems with employment, or you're going to be telling an incredible story about how you invested into your future and you and your family are now Australian permanent resident holders, living your best life, or at that point, you'll either be Australian citizens. Because remember, guys, that when you go over to Australia, once you become a permanent resident, you generally only need to live in Australia as a permanent resident holder for around 3 to 4 years before the entire family becomes eligible to apply for citizenship. Once you become a citizen of the country, especially for kids, you have set your children up for life, because the Australian passport is in the top 10 strongest passports on the planet. It allows you to travel to 183 countries around the world without having to apply for a visit visa first. And of course, it allows Australian citizens to go do working holiday visas like South Africans used to be able to do in countries like the UK and Europe, which unfortunately our passport was pulled from those eligible countries. But your kids one day will be able to go study in Canada, go do a working holiday visa in the UK or America, for example. And one of the biggest benefits as well about obtaining Australian permanent residency is that Australian permanent resident holders do not need visas or job offers to reside in New Zealand. So by going the Australian route, obtaining Australian permanent residency, it literally opens up two of the most attractive first world countries for you as a household or an applicant. Okay, wonderful. Now, guys, unfortunately, we haven't been addressing any questions, queries. It tends to slow things up a little bit, but your consultants will be prepped and ready and on standby for the next 15, 20 minutes. If any of you out there have any pressing questions that are festering, that can't wait till tomorrow, otherwise, those of you that, can wait till tomorrow, please reach out to us, either present your queries on WhatsApp, video, or request an additional consultations. We always say to our clients, there are no silly or stupid questions in the world of immigration, so please don't fester on anything. Get those questions across to us. We want to get all of you out there to a point where you're comfortable enough about the program, you see the benefit of investing into this program and you and your family's future, and Global Migrate would love to project manage and be a part of this, your family's journey. So I just want to say on behalf of Global Migrate South Africa, from my entire team, we thank you again for joining our November Australia webinar. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel and sending it to all our applicants that expressed interest in this. But once again, from Global Migrate South Africa, we thank you again and wishing you all an incredible evening. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.